Hello and welcome to Moving Iron Podcast number 289. This Moving Iron Podcast. I have Andy Caygeon Junkin on from www.stubborn.farm. And Andy reached out to me here not too long ago. We were talking about a few things and sounded like a great podcast to put together because it's a pretty relevant subject. Andy, I'm going to give the paraphrase version of kind of what you do and who you are and those kind of things. But basically, Andy is a guy that started out as a mediator and it kind of rolled his way through, and now he does a lot of stuff with succession planning, and especially in today's farming operations where we're looking at a bunch of multiple generations working on at the farm at the same time. So Andy, welcome to the show, man.
Appreciate you having me on. I really do.
So I gave the 50,000 foot view of Andy there. So I guess as you're looking at this,
I specialize
what it is.
I basically specialize in working with stubborn farmers. I help stubborn farm families work better together. I get them to stop being stubborn with each other and start being stubborn in the critical things that matter. And so I think the biggest thing that folks don't realize is that the biggest change in technology, from my perspective, is the fact that back in the 60s, when Dad was 60, he would retire because he had bad hips. But nowadays, Dad's going in for hip surgery and he's farming to his 80s or 90s. And if you want to farm to the day you die, I'm all about making that happen. But the situation in most family farms is you've got too many chiefs and not enough Indians. You got 3 generations farming together. You also got 2-3 cousins farming together most times, because it doesn't make sense every 25 years to be splitting up the family capital, because you need to keep it all together to afford that technology that gives you the cutting edge. So you got a situation most family farms where everybody's butting heads and pulling the farm in different directions, and we're losing money fast, and it's creating a lot of headaches as a result too.
All right, so so succession planning, obviously that's a big part of that.
Yeah,
and you're gonna talk about that a little bit.
Well,
what you see happening right now.
I think the thing is that 77% of farms do not have a succession plan, and that's not because they have not had a succession planner out to the farm. I'd say 98% of farms have had a succession planner out to the farm, but that just means that 77% of the time, some guy showed up to the farm thinking that he was going to sit down with the farm family for an afternoon and do succession planning, and within 2 hours left the farm. And that usually, the thing is that, and basically leaving the farm saying that family's too damn stubborn for me to work with. And the thing is that what happens in succession planning is if you get a bunch of guys that are stubborn, that are bickering about making simple little production little changes to the farm, and they can't make simple little decisions without pride and egos getting in the way, and then everybody shows up to a meeting with certain expectations, and then they get really upset that the other partners don't have the same expectations, what should be a 3-hour meeting turns into a 10-year family feud. And that's broken. And that's why everybody that's listening to this that understands agriculture knows of a family farm that were 10 years ago one of the best farms in the county that are being divided because of poor estate planning. And everybody knows farm families that are being broken apart. Who wants to be in a situation day to day where you're butting heads and pulling the farm in different directions? And it's creating. We haven't really thought about in farm families. If you have a bunch of partners that were in a family environment where, when it comes to decision making, what becomes more important is who's right, and you butt heads and pull the farm in different directions, things ain't right on that farm. And for a lot of equipment dealers, you have canceled orders because one partner said yes to a certain purchase, and then 2 or 3 other partners said no. And it's creating a lot of pain for the agribusiness industry in itself. So this is a problem we've got to fix, and this is why I'm here on this podcast.
Okay, so talk about that a little bit then. So you sit down with these families, and then I'm sure I've been a part of those where there's multiple generations at the table. You got grandpa and dad and mom and brother and sister, and they're all sitting down at the same table, and you're giving them a pitch about whatever's going on, and there's 6 or 7 different conversations going on at the same time. As you're looking at this kind of stuff, how are you going about bringing these together? How do you make that work?
Yeah, how I make it work is that Basically, I have a 2-year program where I have a family meeting once a month, and I have all the partners come to the table once a month, and then grandpa and granddaughter sit down at the kitchen table, and everybody's got to pitch one idea to improve the efficiency of the farm. And it depends on the size of the operation, but I like to start off with no more than $1,000 changes to the operation. So it's not like you're going to go buy a combine or buy the farm next door.
Right.
The first couple meetings we focus on simple little management improvements. And the thing is that, you know, when young lads come home from agriculture college, they got 1,001 ideas to improve how to improve the operation.
Sure.
At some point in time, these suggestions for change are seen by grandma and grandpa or dad as criticism what mom and dad have done in the past. And soon, grandma and grandpa or dad start to shut down ideas because they look for excuses not to do it. Because basically it comes down to pride and egos getting in the way. And soon the son and daughter, they start to do the same thing and start rejecting mom and dad's ideas because they said no to some other idea. And so the thing is, if you can get everybody coming to the table with an idea to improve efficiency, grandpa's more likely to sit down and listen to what his granddaughter's going to say. And if he knows in 3 minutes time that he's going to explain an idea and he wants his granddaughter listening to his idea. So each meeting I'm making between $3,000 to $10,000 in improved efficiency. But the bigger thing is what I'm getting rid of is that I'm smarter than you attitude and getting farm families to actually sit down and make smart decisions together. And that does two things. Like I've done farm debt turnarounds. At a farm, for instance, I met them in 2019. On February 1st, the bank pulled their financing, $17 million. The first meeting one guy wanted to shut down the livestock enterprise. One guy wanted to sell a good chunk of the land base. I said, guys, we're not going to sit down and make any decisions over $1,000 for 3 months. You guys, first of all, got to get used to talking to each other and talking about things in a common sense way and listening to each other's ideas. You got to stop being stubborn with each other and start being stubborn and actually listening to what the other guy's saying. And then 6 months later, we sat down and we sold 10% of the land base. And we did that strategic planning in 3 hours. But the thing is, we spent the 3 months before that getting everybody listening to each other. And I think that's whether you're doing succession planning or a major strategic turnaround like a farm debt turnaround. I mean, when you build a fire, you start with the kindling first. And same thing with decision making. You start with the small decisions first, get the family used to weighing the pros and cons together, talking about things intelligently without egos being involved. And just like adding larger and larger wood to the fire, you start making larger and larger decisions. And I think that's what we have to do when it comes to farm debt turnarounds and farm succession planning.
Okay, so talk about this a little bit. So there's right now, if you look at most farming operations, you've got grandpa, grandma, and you've got mom and dad, and then you've got sister and brother, and that's
Sure.
the 3 generations that you typically see on the farm right now.
Sure.
Grandpa's farming until he's 80. You know, you've got 80, 85, something like that. You've got a 55 or 60-year-old mom and dad that are in the middle of that, and then you've got the 25 to 35 something coming back to the farm now. That middle generation seems like they're never going to get that chance to be the true farm operator. I don't know if that's the right term or not, but
yeah,
there's that gap right there, that overlap where it seems like by the time grandma and grandpa move out of the picture and retired, that it's kind of retirement time for mom and dad to kind of start thinking about that. Now, what are some of the instances you've seen there, and how are those situations different from maybe some of the other things that you run into?
Well, I think you just seen with the Queen. You had Prince Charles. He took over the management of the family business at the age of 73, and that's where we're headed with agriculture. And I think simply put, I've seen a lot of guys in their 60s and 70s suddenly be able to take over the ownership of a family farm. And it's an overwhelming feeling because 6 months after the funeral, they suddenly realized that grandpa had been trading all the commodities, he had made all the financial decisions, and there's a gap in the wisdom. There's the son and daughter in their 60s or 50s or 60s think, hey, that's easy, but then they suddenly realize it's not. I had a guy break down in tears one time, call me up because he had been running the farm for 2 years. His dad had cancer, and yet his dad was trading corn and the commodities in the hospital. And everybody expected that dad would, his in that situation, it was a grandpa at that time, would walk away from the hospital. It was just a few weeks in the hospital, but he never walked out of the hospital. And something like commodity trading, it takes 10 years to learn the wisdom. And so what I'm really a big fan of is something I call the 9,000 hour rule. So the first 3 years that a kid comes home to that farm and wants to join the family business, you got to prove that you're this tall to get on the ride. And so for the first 3 years that the kid comes home, the average farmer that I see that's from a successful farm, they're working about 3,000 hours. So you have to work 3,000 hours. And every month we do a performance review as to three things. We want to talk about what's one incorrect belief that you got tweaked. So the thing is that if a son shows up half an hour later than grandpa to milk cows, there's got to be a question as to why aren't you the first one in the barn if you want this to be your future. And so, I mean, if you can make one change in mindset, such as being the first one to the barn, not the last one to the barn, and getting rid of that mindset of entitlement, if you can do that monthly for 24 months, you're going to have a successor that's going to be successful. Every meeting I'll make one change in character. So something like having a short temper, which a lot of farm families, all the family members have a problem with. If you can get a family, the way they react to things, instead of making a molehill into a mountain, if you can get them to look at things differently and have less of a temper, if you can make 24 changes like that over the course of 2 years, you're going to have a whole different business environment where the family is going to be more fun to work with, and the business is going to be more successful. And also you're going to have successful successors. And then each month I make one transfer of responsibility. So like, let's take commodity trading. I really think that within the first 3 years that the grandson comes home, he, and maybe even dad, if grandpa's doing the trading, maybe grandson and dad start each trading 5% of the corn and beans. And so that everybody, and maybe the granddaughter also learns, so that maybe you're only trading, have 15% of the actual corn and beans being traded by somebody that's inexperienced, right? But between three partners that are juniors, but everybody's learning how to do that, so that when grandpa dies, that wisdom is at 6 feet under. Because any fool can give a son and daughter a tractor. Very few farmers are successful in teaching their kids how to make that tractor pay. And that's why we have so many family farms failing. And so the thing is that if you do that over 9,000 hours or 3 years, and your successor doesn't just have potential, he's really, if he's continuously improving himself or herself, you're going to have a successful successor. And then that's a partner that you want to have. And the thing is that I think is, as far as the transfer of assets, I don't believe succession planning, it should be talking about the transfer of assets. I think succession planning should simply be a strategic plan. And all it is outlines over 30 years, if your grandson puts a shoulder into this operation and takes it from a $5 million farm to a $20 million farm, what percentage of the growth is he or she entitled to? How are we going to split that up between three grandkids that are all putting their shoulder into the operation? And we have to have that discussion, I think, within the first 3 years that the kids come home, so that you've got a situation that, over the next 30 years, it's not going to be everybody fighting over scraps of a piece of a pie, but we're talking about how to grow the pie. What was the recipe that made the farm successful? Let's make sure we got successful successors that can manage and grow a business. And really, the bigger thing is, it doesn't matter who owns more ownership of the asset. What matters is that the family can do it together. So you have the best, everybody coming to the table. It doesn't matter who has more equity in the business. The best idea wins. So it might even be a granddaughter coming to the table and she might only own 3% stock in the family business at the current time, but she has a better idea than grandpa. That idea goes ahead, and the family farm will go ahead for the next 100 years. And it's only when we shift the mindset from me to we, and we have a team dynamic instead of one person trying to be the boss, that the farm will be successful. Now, outside of those meetings, one patriarch can be the boss, day-to-day operations. That's fine, but I think there's got to be time and place that everybody has the opportunity that if they prove themselves to be a good partnership potential, they can contribute to ideas and they don't feel like a slave.
Right. Okay, so when you're looking at the grooming of the successor, those kind of things, you got 3 kids that are coming back to the farm. All 3 kids want to come back to the farm. What's your vision? Like, if you're going to have a conversation with a mom and dad or a grandma and grandpa, whoever it is that you're talking to, you got these 3 individuals coming back to the farm. How do you have the conversation of who's going to do what where? Like, for example, I mean, are you looking at strengths and weaknesses of each one of these individuals and saying, like, okay, this person, we're thinking they should be doing this and this is what they want to go do? I mean, how are you having that conversation of what are those 3 kids going to do when they come back to the farm, and how are you going to delegate what functions of the farm are going to be, cross-functional to each one of these kids?
Yeah, we make sure we tie talents to strengths. And more importantly, we understand that there's a respect so that there's not competition between the person that has the most aptitude for a certain skill set. They're the ones that are doing the job. So if your grandson is a financial whiz at university and got say a finance degree, grandpa doesn't feel that the need that he has to be the one doing the farm financials because he owns the majority of assets. What matters is the person with the most talent is doing the right jobs and the passion for whatever that they're doing. But also what I'm really concerned about is turning weaknesses into strengths. So, because everybody's got weaknesses, but in order to have a successful business, you've got to also make sure that you shore up your weaknesses, so that 10 years from now you got a business that's bulletproof. That makes sense.
So how do you go? Yeah, it makes good sense. So how do you go? So most of these situations, you'll have a single entity. Mom and dad run the farm.
Sure.
Dad does the farm. Mom does the books. And, they've got this thing going on. Then you transition down to the 3 kids coming back to the farm. How do you go from 1 to 3, and how do you make those? How do you divide that up?
Well, I think
that's what I see as a struggle.
Well, okay. So one problem I see that's quite often is, let's say, a dairy farm. You have one son that shows strengths in livestock, and then one son becomes a cash crop. But this happens quite often.
Right.
They get into their little fiefdoms, and they basically make a point of not making a comment or suggestion for improvement. Like, for instance, the dairy farmer sees what the cash cropper does and has some suggestions for how it could be improved upon, but holds back those comments because we get into our little fiefdoms. And that eventually leads to the split up of the operation because there's no cross-functional ideas being shared. And what's important is that there's a time and place once a month. It doesn't matter whose area is responsible. You're able to provide feedback to each enterprise so that each enterprise is operating at a maximum efficiency. And more importantly, what I see quite often is that, let's say that a dairy farmer in that scenario had a suggestion for improvement to the cash cropper. Quite often the cash cropper will become defensive and try to shirk off blame and try to bury his mistakes under the carpet and try to point out the fault in what the dairy farmer's doing, and that leads to a dysfunctional family business. What we got to do is have a sense of humility within the family, where we're embracing our weaknesses and trying to turn them into strengths. And it doesn't matter whose idea, who said what. What matters is the best idea wins, and that if somebody has feedback for how I could run my enterprise better, I embrace that feedback and turn that into a strength.
Right. So obviously you would be part of this, but I guess looking at a big picture of like an advisory council of sorts, right? You got the commodity advisory person, you've got an agronomist type advisory person, you got a large animal type advisory person of sorts. I mean, looking at those kind of things, how do those fit into what you do, and how important is that to your program?
Well, I see in a lot of family farms, we get only one person making decisions in one area, and you've got
Right.
five smart people involved in the business that see things from different angles. And the farm is failing because we're sweeping mistakes underneath the carpet and trying to point fault in what the other guy's doing instead of trying to improve ourselves. I was at a situation. This is a game-changing moment for my business. 15 years ago, I started off as a mediator, and I got a reputation for being like one of the best. I was the guy that got called in after there was 3, 4 succession planners. A lot of lawyers and accountants started calling me in from across North America. I was the guy from Canada that they flew in, and that's how I got down here in the U.S. And worked in 21 states before I got married. The thing is that I got called in to mediate the most dire farm succession, farm debt turnarounds. And I found it really frustrating because the one thing I kept on seeing was really good farm families that were stubborn. And there was a situation, there was 2 brothers in a partnership. Their dad had been the mediator between the 2 brothers. He died 7 years before, and the 2 brothers could not run an operation together. And 2 sister-in-laws were sitting at the kitchen table, and they were best friends in high school, and they were worst enemies that day. And one of the nephews was out leading a 4-H calf, and he's leading this 4-H calf, and this kid was about 17, and his mother complained just as we started the meeting that she couldn't get the kid to take off his school clothes and put on barn clothes. He just couldn't wait to get out of the barn. He was a kid that would milk cows in the morning, and before he got on the bus to go to school, and then he'd be right off the bus, he'd run to the barn. He lived to farm. And yet 4-H, he was leading this 4-H calf, and I thought, how ironic was it that the farm was bringing out the best in the character of this young man, of continuously improving himself, and yet inside the kitchen table, the farmer was bringing out the worst in everybody at that kitchen table. And there was a Bible on the table, and the words, it was actually Matthew 7:5, and it said, the words of Jesus said, do not talk about taking this speck of dust out of your brother's eye until you take the plank out of your own. And I don't care if you're a Christian or not, those are wise words to turn any family business around. We got to get from the mindset of pointing fingers, and that was what was going on at the kitchen table. Was everybody in that room was brilliant. The problem they had in that business is they all had their own little area of enterprise. And that kitchen table, everybody was pointing fingers, and they all had 3 fingers pointing back at them. They were a really upstanding family. They were really good, but there's a lot of the business was not being successful because there's money slipping between the cracks, and that it came down to the dysfunctionality of everybody wanting to shift blame and point blame and what the other guy's doing, but not want to make changes in what they were doing. And that's the fundamentals of my business. Is how do we get everybody? Everybody's got 5% about themselves as far as their character in their personal life as well as their business life. That's got to be tweaked in order to have a successful business. And if you can get everybody to instead of point blame on what their partners are doing, to look at self-improving themselves, just like that kid that was leading the 4-H calf. If you look at the farm as an environment, in farming, we get stubborn at some point in time when we encourage kids as teenagers to learn as much and improve themselves as much on the farm, but then in our 20s and 30s, we say, we're perfect, we don't need to change. And that's what causes dysfunctional families and dysfunctional family businesses. And we got to get rid of that dysfunctionality by embracing our dysfunctionality and looking at self-improving ourselves in our personal lives as well as our businesses. Because the fact is that nobody gets married expecting to get divorced, and nobody gets marries the family business or starts going into partnership with their family expecting there's going to be problems. And the whole issue is we have this attitude of happily ever after. We get into relationships thinking it's going to be happily ever after without ever expecting there to be problems. And the problem is we don't have a problem-solving techniques. And so what I'm encouraging these farm families to do is get really good at problem-solving together. And if we can get the family really good at problem-solving, there's no problems that they can't handle together.
Right on. All right, Andy, so if I want to reach out to you and hire you, give me the steps here of what day one looks like all the way through being just 50,000 foot view of that. What's that look like?
Basically, I just have a 6-week program where I work with each individual. that's involved in the business, and that gives them basically it's life coaching. I wouldn't call that publicly to farmers, but basically helps you get crystal clear on what your goals are, and also helps you understand who I am and really get to know me first before you invite me to a family meeting. You have to ask yourself, is this a guy that you really want to work with or not? And then I'll sit down with your family for 6 weeks, and we have what I call an orientation of how we work together. And then we meet weekly for 6 weeks, and then I just meet with your family once a month, and we make one improvement in how you guys work together each meeting, and one improvement in everybody's character, and we try to make $3,000 to $10,000 in improved efficiency. And I do that over 2 years, and then after 2 years, we'll sit down for an afternoon and do succession planning. And that's to me how I work. And yeah, I work with a lot of equipment dealers. They're asked me to come out to their meetings this winter. I have a TED Talk that you can go on my website, stubborn.farm, and see my talk. I also do a one-day workshop, which is game-changing for farm families. A lot of farm families, they just have a hard time getting the process started. And I have a workshop that basically when an individual or the whole family comes to the meeting, that when they leave the meeting, they'll have a whole different mindset, and that helps them succeed in getting the process started. There are a lot of families who are just stuck with how to get the process started, and this workshop changes that. And it's a great way for the equipment dealer to develop a relationship.
Right on.
So. Right on. So, well, I mean, the thing is that if you go to www.stubborn.farm, anybody in the agriculture business, you can go to, if you're a farmer, I'll send you a book. I wrote a book called Bulletproof Your Farm. I've actually written 5 books, but that's my most recent book. I'll send you a copy. You can actually, if you sign up on the website, I'll actually send you an electronic version that you can listen to, like an audiobook. I'll send you a text. You can listen to it this afternoon, and I'll send you a hard copy of the book. And I'll send you, if you're an equipment dealer, I'll send you 5 copies of the book that you can carry around in your truck. And if you know a farm family that's struggling with succession planning issues, whether it's this month or 2 years from now, you can just hand them the book and put your card inside the book. And, you know, it might help that family actually improve the odds of them still farming together in 30 years' time. And they'll not forget that you introduced them to the different concepts of how to do things.
Well, that's all good stuff. Folks, want to reach out to you and get more information about what it is. Is stubborn.farm the best place to go?
Stubborn.farm. That's right.
Right on.
Okay.
Right on. Well, Andy, I appreciate you being on the podcast, man.
I really appreciate that. Let's save some family farms together.
Right on, man.
Thanks very much. You take care and God bless.
Take care. All right, thanks, man. I'm Casey Seymour with Moving Iron Podcast. Make sure to check me out on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. That's where you find all the latest editions of Moving Iron Podcast. Go to LinkedIn at Moving Iron Podcast, and go to the YouTube channel, Moving Iron Podcast, and you can see all the video versions of us there. So for more information about the Moving Iron Podcast, go to movingironllc.com, and you can find everything there. So with that, I am Casey Seymour with Andy Caygeon Junkin. Let's go move some iron, folks. Out.
Iron in the 21st century. Hard-working people working hard for you and me. Moving iron, time and time again. Through the years you'll find us here. Moving